The passage you've provided is a detailed, long-form narrative with a specific, intense tone. It's written to be emotionally evocative and persuasive, using metaphorical language to describe a complex and deeply psychological dynamic in a relationship. The core message focuses on the idea of a man seeing through a woman's facade or mask and her punitive reaction, which is then reframed as a form of self-preservation. This is then used as a rationale for the man to remain silent, grounded, and to not engage in her games or drama. The text is full of rich, symbolic language and psychological concepts, particularly referencing Carl Jung. Here's a breakdown of the passage's key themes and a possible rewrite that maintains the core message while making it more direct and concise. The goal of the rewrite will be to streamline the language, remove repetition, and present the concepts in a clearer, less verbose manner. The original text is very verbose and uses repetition, a specific, dramatic tone, and metaphorical language to drive its points home. It's written in a style common in certain online communities and self-help literature that focuses on relationship dynamics. Rewrite, the unshakable man. In every relationship, there's a moment when you see beyond the surface. You look past the charming facade and the captivating stories, and you see the underlying patterns of a person's behavior. This is the moment you see her shadow, the parts of herself she's denied and hidden away. When you refuse to look away, she feels exposed, and her reaction is swift and punishing. She might whisper, "You're paranoid," or launch a sharp attack like, "You're unstable." This isn't a plea for understanding, it's a punishment for shattering the illusion she lives in. You didn't fall in love with a real person, you fell for a carefully crafted dream. But now, that dream has shattered. You see the chaos and insecurity she projects onto the world. This is the curse of clarity. When you see the truth and refuse to play your part in her narrative, she strikes back by painting you as the villain. Your clear perception becomes a source of immense chaos for her, and the deeper your insight, the more intense her emotional sabotage becomes. When she tries to label you as obsessive or controlling, you don't argue. You instinctively refuse to shrink because you know that any defense you offer only gives her more evidence for her story. Most men would apologize and try to explain, but she wouldn't hear them. In her mind, your insight isn't a sign of love, it's a sign of guilt. Carl Jung warned that most people see what they want to see, but a rare few see what lies beneath. When you are one of those few, you become the enemy. She may tell you she wants honesty, but the moment you genuinely show her reality, when you call out her manipulations, she recoils and twists the situation to make you the problem. Jung explained that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. For her, clarity isn't intimacy, it's an invasion. It's the collapse of the mask she has so carefully built. By refusing to be her emotional puppet, you force her to face herself, and that is the one thing she cannot do. Most men never learn this. She doesn't fear you seeing her, she fears you seeing through her, through the drama, the guilt games, and the sudden coldness. Her responses are not honest, they are deflections meant to remove your power. When a woman loses her emotional leverage, her ego panics. She can't control the man who doesn't flinch. She can't guilt the man who has stopped chasing her love. She'll brand you as toxic because she won't go on the journey of self-understanding. Instead, she makes it your fault. If she were to admit you see her clearly, she would have to destroy her entire identity. So she flips the script, your insight becomes an accusation of judgment, and your calm silence becomes emotional abuse. This is the price of clarity. She can't control you emotionally, so she'll punish you socially. Jung warned that the man who brings light into darkness will not be thanked, he will be hated and feared. But this only happens if he chooses to keep explaining himself. So don't. Hold your gaze and never blink. The power of silence and the unshakable man. She will begin to recast you as the distant, cold villain in her story. She whispers to your friends, posts subtle hints about your flaws, and turns casual observers against you. This public attack is her ego's resistance to a deeper truth. You've become the deeper self she fears, so she destroys your reputation to protect her illusion. You don't defend, explain, or apologize. Why? Because her power exists only when you doubt yourself. If you hold your identity intact and refuse to bend to her projection, you remain free. Awake men don't need to justify, they just need to exist. You let her believe the story she tells. Your strength isn't in proving her wrong, it's in not needing to. When she asks, "Why are you so quiet?" she isn't seeking answers, she's trying to pull you back into her script. The moment you stopped reacting, you triggered something ancient in her psyche, her own shadow rising. Jung taught that silence is the mirror where the unconscious is forced to stare back at itself. She defines reality by how you respond. So when you give her nothing, her world shakes. She is forced to hear the things she never wanted to hear, her own guilt, her insecurity, her manipulation. Silence becomes her courtroom, and she's the only one on trial. She didn't want truth, she wanted control, the mirror she couldn't break. She didn't want truth, she wanted control, dominion over your thoughts, your perception, your heart, and your soul. That's the part you must truly understand. She didn't seek connection through understanding. She sought possession through domination. From the beginning, she wasn't listening to learn who you were, she was assessing how much of yourself you'd surrender to her carefully crafted narrative. Every emotional conversation, every subtle guilt trip, every tear-stained story, wasn't necessarily about truth. It was a test. A silent exam to see whether you would collapse into her version of reality. And in that, you must realize something deeper: when someone prioritizes control over truth, their interest in you is not rooted in love, it is rooted in power. A power that must constantly be fed by your compliance, your confusion, and your willingness to abandon yourself. Because truth is a mirror. It doesn't flatter the ego. It exposes it. It doesn't soothe the story, it shatters the illusion. But control? Control allows the mirror to be reshaped. Repainted. Reframed. It lets her take your strength and call it aggression. Your boundaries and call them abandonment. Your clarity and call it coldness. Control allows her to rearrange reality until you are the villain in the script she has written. A script that justifies her wounds, her anger, her decisions. And the more you apologize for things you never did, the more you validate the fiction she's built to protect herself from accountability. But the moment you stopped doing that, the moment you stopped apologizing for imaginary sins and refused to surrender your sanity to preserve the illusion, that was the moment the equilibrium broke. Your stillness broke the spell. You stopped playing the role she assigned to you. You stopped trying to explain yourself to someone who never truly listened. You stopped bending your truth to fit a reality built on emotional smoke and mirrors. And that's when the shift happened. At first, she was confused. Disoriented. Because people who manipulate don't expect the performance to end without a fight. They expect escalation or emotional warfare, not stillness. But your stillness wasn't silence rooted in passivity. It was rooted in presence. In consciousness. In a powerful awareness of what was truly happening beneath the surface. You didn't go numb, you became clear. You didn't shut down, you stepped back into your power. And that was the true threat. Not your words. Not your actions. But your calm. Because nothing terrifies the manipulative ego more than someone who refuses to be emotionally controlled. She could feel it. Your energy was no longer available for extraction. Your spirit was no longer bending to her storms. Your soul was no longer shrinking to keep the peace. You had become still. And in that stillness, you became the most dangerous thing in her world, a man she could no longer control. The accusations were projections. She began to lash out. Not because you harmed her, but because you no longer allowed her to harm you. She said you were cold. She said you had changed. She said you were distant, selfish, or emotionally dead. But those words weren't describing your truth. They were describing her fear. Her unraveling. Her inability to recognize herself without your emotional validation. Her panic at the realization that her grip over your heart had slipped away. Her accusations weren't reflections of reality, they were projections of collapse. Of ego collapse. Of narrative collapse. Of identity collapse. Because when the story you've told yourself about who you are begins to dissolve, the pain is unbearable. And in that pain, she needed someone to blame. That someone was you. But here's the irony, and the mastery. You said nothing. You didn't defend. You didn't attack. You didn't fall into the trap of proving yourself to someone who had already made up their mind. Because a man who knows the truth doesn't shout. He observes. He reflects. He understands. You weren't the villain, you were the mirror. People confuse emotional control with love all the time. They mistake possession for connection. They think intensity means depth. But real connection isn't measured by how deeply someone can manipulate your emotions, it's measured by how safely two people can exist in truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. You weren't the villain. But to someone who needed a villain to justify their chaos, you were cast as one. Why? Because you became something she couldn't manipulate, a mirror. A mirror doesn't argue. It doesn't flatter. It doesn't twist. It simply reflects what is. And that's what made you dangerous. Not because you hurt her, but because you revealed her. Your presence, your refusal to collapse, your grounded energy. It all reflected back to her the very things she had worked so hard to avoid, her control patterns, her insecurities, her shadow. Carl Jung said it best. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people aren't ready for that journey. Most people don't want understanding, they want reinforcement. They want a partner who doesn't reflect them, but who absorbs their wounds without question. But you didn't absorb her anymore. You didn't become the emotional landfill for her unprocessed trauma. You became the reflection. And the reflection does not lie. Your presence revealed her absence. When someone loses control over your emotions, they often experience it as abandonment. But what they're really mourning is their inability to manipulate. They call you emotionally unavailable when what they truly mean is, you're no longer accessible to my chaos. And that's exactly what happened. Your presence exposed her absence. Your stillness exposed her noise. Your emotional sovereignty revealed her emotional dependency. And suddenly, she wasn't fighting you, she was fighting the parts of herself that she had disowned for years. But instead of facing them, she ran. Or raged. Or accused. Because that's easier than saying, maybe I'm the problem. It's easier to destroy the mirror than look into it. And you, in your stillness, were the mirror she couldn't break. Control was her love language. It's important to understand something else here, not all manipulation is conscious. Sometimes, it's learned. It's inherited. It's a defense mechanism that was once necessary for survival. She may have been shaped by trauma. She may have learned to equate love with control, because control made her feel safe. Maybe she was abandoned once. Maybe she was hurt by someone who left her powerless. And in response, she promised herself, never again. I will never be the one without control. And so every time she felt affection, she also felt fear. Because love, to someone who's been betrayed, often feels like a threat. It's a risk. A surrender. So what did she do? She tried to control it. She tried to control you. Not because she hated you. But because loving you made her feel vulnerable. And vulnerability, unprocessed and unresolved, can often show up as manipulation, defensiveness, or emotional warfare. But while understanding can breed compassion, it does not justify abuse. Her pain may explain her behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. You can feel empathy for someone's wounds without letting them bleed all over you. You can love someone and still walk away from their chaos. You can care deeply and still protect your peace. And you did. That's why she will never forget you. She will remember you, but not the way she thinks. In her conscious mind, she may rewrite the story. She may say you were emotionally distant. That you lacked empathy. That you gave up. But her unconscious knows the truth. And it will remember you. Not as a monster. Not as a coward. But as the man who refused to be broken. The man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. The man who didn't beg to be understood because he understood himself. You didn't win her heart. You won her unconscious. You became embedded in a part of her that knows, beneath all the illusions, that you weren't the villain. That you were the test. The reflection. The opportunity to evolve. And maybe she wasn't ready. But that doesn't make you any less powerful. Because in this world, very few men walk away with their soul intact. You did. You are the unbroken mirror. At the end of it all, you didn't lose anything. You gained clarity. You gained strength. You gained your reflection back. Because that's what happens when a man chooses stillness over rage, clarity over confusion, and presence over performance. He reclaims himself. And when you reclaim yourself, you no longer need anyone to validate your worth. You no longer ask, was I enough? You know that you were always more than enough, just not for someone who mistook control for love. Final word, the man she couldn't control will become the truth she can't escape. There is a different kind of power in stillness. A quiet strength that leaves a mark deeper than noise ever could. You didn't need to win the argument. You didn't need to change her mind. You didn't need to rewrite her story. You just had to walk away as the one thing she feared the most. A man she couldn't change. A man she couldn't manipulate. A man who stood so firm in his truth that even silence became thunder. And in that thunder, she heard everything you never said. And she will remember. Because in the end, she didn't lose you to another woman. She lost you to herself. To the mask she couldn't take off. To the mirror she couldn't face. To the man who became the reflection of everything she needed to see, but couldn't handle. You are that reflection. The mirror that didn't break. The truth that didn't bend. And the silence, that said it all.